So the hypothalamus, as we begin to talk about what it does, the bigger question is, what does it not regulate? It's actually a very, very important structure in the brain. Much smaller than the thalamus, but very, very important. And it's going to be important as far as the autonomic nervous system is concerned. So parasympathetic and sympathetic response. It's going to be important as far as the limbic structure. It's kind of the limbic structures, which are located a little bit anterior inside of the system, are going to be associated with mood. So the hypothalamus sometimes is called the seat of emotions. But the hypothalamus is going to be important as far as all of the necessities that we intake into our body. Our thirst centers are going to be there. Our hunger centers are going to be located there. Sex drive, all of these things, even thermoregulation is going to be influenced specifically by the hypothalamus. So it is a very, 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 very critical structure. And once again, it communicates with the pituitary gland, so its endocrine function cannot be overstated, both because it produces hormones, neurohormones, that are produced and then stored in the posterior pituitary, but it also communicates and enhances or inhibits the production of hormones from the anterior pituitary as well. Slide number 12 takes us on to another portion of the diencephalon referred to as the epithalamus. So we have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. Now the epithalamus is going to contain the pineal gland. And the pineal gland or pineal body is going to be a very, very important gland as far as circadian rhythmicity. So if you see that on the exam, circadian rhythmicity is going to be talking about your night and day cycle. So it's the cycling that we have as far as waking and sleeping. And the pineal gland is going to be important for that due to the production of melatonin. Now you'll remember that serotonin is one of the compounds that we talked about when we talked about biogenic amines. One of the biogenic amines, and indoleamine specifically, is serotonin. Melatonin is going to be very closely associated with serotonin. So, once again, remember, pineal gland produces melatonin, which is going to be the main hormone that is responsible for our night and day wake and sleep cycles. As we move on and we start to talk about the brain stem is going to contain, first of all, the midbrain, second of all, the pons, and third is going to be the medulla, or the medulla oblongata as it's sometimes called. As we begin to talk, first of all, about the midbrain, there are fiber tracts that exist in the form of cerebral peduncles. And this peduncles, or peduncles, are going to be fiber tracts that exist inside of the midbrain. Importantly, is going to be the next structure that is listed on your slides, and that is the substantia nigra. The substantia nigra, which appears black or darkened, is going to be responsible as the site for production of dopamine. Now remember, dopamine is a catecholamine, and it is important as far as motor movement is concerned, learning and memory cognition, and it's also going to be important because it is the target of a ton of pharmaceuticals. If you remember, it is the target, the dopamine transporter specifically is going to be the target for drugs like methamphetamines. It is also going to be important as far as cocaine, where it has its major site of action. So a lot of illicit drugs, but also pharmaceuticals that are helpful as well. And so this system is important as far as mood regulation and things like that. So there are drugs that target the system in order to improve those things. Specifically, inside of the membrane, the substantia nigra is there for the production of dopamine. And if you'll remember, dopamine is important for motor movement, so impairment in the cells that produce dopamine in the substantia nigra leads to Parkinson's or Parkinsonism due to the destruction of those cell bodies, or soma, the somatic region for dopaminergic neurons. The brain stem continued. As we talk about this, we're going to talk about more hindbrain structures, the pons and medulla specifically. The pons is going to be important as far as breathing. It is a breathing control center. So rhythmic breathing that exists in your body is impacted greatly by the pons. But it also has another function that's kind of interesting, and that is the control of emesis, and that is vomiting. Both it and the lower structure, the more inferior structure to it, which is the medulla. Now, the medulla, or medulla oblongata, has auditory relays, so important as far as hearing is concerned. It also has a breathing center, and it is going to be important as far as cardiac control. So specifically, certain things like vasoaction is going to be impacted inside of the medulla oblongata. There's a respiratory center, much like the pons, and it's going to impact a lot of things as far as not just regular respiratory function, but actions we have in the respiratory center. So things like hiccuping, coughing, sneezing, and also swallowing is going to be impacted by the medulla. And the last thing is, once again, this is a center that is important as far as emesis, or throwing up, vomiting. The last structure we're going to talk about as far as surface feature of the brain is going to be the cerebellum. Now, you remember the cerebellum, again, looks like cauliflower that's located on the posterior inferior side of the cerebrum. There are two hemispheres to it as well, and they're connected by the vermis. Excuse me. There are specific cells that are associated with the cerebellum, and they are referred to as Purkinje cells. They're very, very distinct in their structure, and so make sure you know that. Purkinje cells are specifically associated with the cerebellum. If you were to take a cross-section of the cerebellum, what you would find is that there is an arborous-looking white tissue layer to it, and that's referred to as the arbor vitae. The arbor vitae looks like a tree, and there are peduncles that are associated with it as well that are going to carry information from the cerebellum over into the brainstem and eventually to the thalamus as a relay port. As far as its physiology, it is very important as far as involuntary movements, like movements of the eye, certain reflexes that go through the cerebellum, spatial awareness, so it allows you to kind of comprehend how close or how far things away, but also, interestingly enough, it is important as far as being able to apply the right amount of force when opening a door, when pulling on something. It allows you to comprehend what you need to do in order to make something happen. And the last thing is that it allows information to travel from it to the brainstem via specific nuclei, and then from the brainstem on up to higher orders. We'll talk about something else next.